So how is everybody doing today? Feel free to chat in the chat box or use your microphones or whatever to ask questions along the way, to tell me anything you need me to know. And there's another person. And I will be happy to answer your questions as they come up. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about what it takes to get ready for a standardized test. And right now we're sort of talking in general terms. I know some of you might be concerned about the MCAT, the GRE, the OAT, the TAT, the PCAT, all these other alphabet soup of tests. So in the chat box, let me know what tests you guys are primarily having to take. So we got some MCATs, some GREs, and some DATs here. All right. So the GRE is going to be a little different than the other two. Like MCAT, DAT, you can sort of think about in a lot the same. The difference is the level of content and the time it's going to take to prep for these things. So I'll make sure to address that when we get to that point. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Doug. I'm with a staff advisor with the HPA. I'm the test prep specialist. I've been working in test prep for the better part of it, well, over a decade now. And before that, I used to be a chemistry professor. Yes, I taught OChem. I know it's evil, right? Anyways, let's get started with our content for today. So there's some things to think about when it comes to preparing for your test. And some of these I think you're going to look at and say, well, why do we care about this? But your application, when you're taking your test, your practice test and target scores, these are all things that isn't necessarily test prep per se, but it is important to decide how you're going to prep for your test. So this is why these are important things. So let's start with that application. First thing you really should do is figure out when you're planning on applying. And we know that that might change. You might have experiences that you didn't obtain because of this, that, and the other. You might have changed it, but you got to start somewhere. So I always suggest figure out when you're going to apply, like which cycle. If you're applying this June, you want to have that in mind to figure out when you need to be taking your test. And when you're going to take your test determines a lot of other things. So work backwards from your app date. So figure out when you're planning on turning in that application, and then give yourself 3 months before that. That's when you should be taking your standardized test. 3 months is that way because if you need to retake the test, you have time to do a little bit of study and schedule and retake. In the case of some exams, like the DAT, you can't register for the test for 90 days. So in the case of the DAT, you actually want to give yourself more than 3 months. So like I would back it up like 4 or maybe 5 months, because that way you can still get an opportunity to take a second test before your application. You always want to plan for the worst case scenario. So if you are going to be applying in June of 2021, you want to take your first test by April of 2021. That way, if you had to retake, you could retake in May or June so that you have the test score. And by the time your application is getting processed, like I said, with DAT, I would back it up to say maybe March or February, because you've got that 90-day window, which you cannot sign up for a new test. So that becomes a bigger issue. The nice thing about the DAT, though, is that you get the score right away. Same with the GRE. Not so much for the MCAT. As far as prepping like for the test goes, before that test date, you want to give yourself 3 months at least if you're not in school. If you are in school, give yourself 6 months to prepare for that first test. Like give yourself plenty of time. If you're in classes, you should treat studying for the test like, maybe a couple hours a day, 7 days a week. So you're putting in around 14 hours a week or so into studying for the test over 6 months. During the summer, during summer, if you're not in classes, I would say treat it like it's almost a full-time job, where you're doing like 6 hours a day of prep in any given day, so that you're working almost 40 hours a week on your test. And that's for that 3 month solid time. That would actually get you well and prepped for these tests. In the case of GRE, I would reduce these things down to like 2 and 4 because it doesn't take as much to prepare for the GRE because of the content of the test. Say if you're looking at the GRE, you're looking at really just algebra-based math, algebra geometry, and you're looking at high vocab. So those are things you can prep for more rapidly. So you don't need as much time to prep for something like the GRE. DAT and MCAT, on the other hand, beefy, lots of content, general chemistry, biochemistry, organic chemistry, biology, physics, not for the DAT, but physics. But you've got the PAT to work on, and then you got math for the DAT. So a lot more content that you have to cover on those things. So what about the test date? You have to be prepared for how the tests are scheduled, and different tests have different scheduling. So you want to, like we talked about, pick that test date based on when your application date is, and then register for it as soon as you can. So for example, MCAT has a very different scheduling structure than the other two. So let's talk about MCAT for a moment. The MCAT, you have certain dates you can take the test and certain times to register for the test. If you're going to take the test in certain months, for example, if you wanted to take the test this year in April, May, or June, you should have already registered for that back last week, basically. Last week, they opened up the registration, and the MCAT registration is like getting tickets for Comic-Con, because like everybody wants to go and the tickets sell out like super fast. And the same thing happens with the MCAT. The test dates just fill up so fast that you might not find a location close to you. You might not find a time that works for you. You might not find the date that you want. So this is why when you're scheduling for the MCAT, you need to be online that day that it opens, ready to go. Like just refresh until you actually get your spot in the queue. It's kind of terrible the way that works. I will say there's something you can do after the fact that to get that test date is wait, like once you wait about a month into that window, people will start dropping the test. They'll start dropping because they're getting cold feet. They're not ready. So spots will start to open up. So what the MCAT has available is you can get on, it's not a waiting list, but you can get alerted for up to 5 testing centers for up to 5 dates. Like, so 5 dates at 5 different potential testing centers where you're actually, they'll give you a notification when a spot becomes available. So that is something that is helpful if you don't get that test date right away where you want it. Do be prepared for the MCAT to have to take it in a city that isn't close to home. It's not unusual to have to, fly or drive somewhere and stay in a hotel the night before to take your MCAT. So that is something that can happen. For the GRE and the DAT, it's a lot easier because you can just pick your date, and if it's available on a certain date at a certain testing center, then you can take it. And the Prometric gives both of those exams. Actually, ETS gives one, Prometric gives the other, but they will both work in the same way, is that you just register, or you go on their website and you'll see what dates are available and what times are available. And you can they're like pretty much 7 days a week, lots of different time options for you. So registering for DAT and GRE are substantially easier. There's a question that says, for those with accommodations, will the locations be restricted / different? And that is true, yes. If you have accommodations that you need, you will have fewer testing centers available to you and potentially fewer dates. It depends on what your accommodations are. Like if you're double time for the MCAT, that means it's a 2-day administration. You may have to go to a specific testing center. But given where we're here in the Bay Area or like Sacramento area, there are testing centers that do have those accommodations available to you. And you actually register through a different system if you have accommodations for the MCAT. If you do have accommodations, by the way, you should get that taken care of like right away. Give yourself at least 3 months to get your accommodations set up before you want to have your test date, before you even register for your test date. In the case of the MCAT, it can take quite some time to get those accommodations taken care of. And also on the topic of accommodations, this is a good point. Thank you for bringing it up. You should, number one, also get that done early, because you need to know how to do your own practice tests based on the accommodations you receive. Number two, if you don't have an IEP, if you don't have an IEP from high school, individualized education plan, you should plan on visiting with a educational psychologist who can do a full workup and evaluation, because that's what is going to be required to get your accommodations on these tests. They do not accept the letter that the UC Davis Office of Disabled Students puts together. That is not good enough for getting accommodations on a standardized test like this. You either need your IEP or an evaluation from an educational psychologist, or both, to get those accommodations. The other thing about your test date is set it in stone. You don't want to reschedule. If you give yourself permission to reschedule, then you're just going to keep pushing and kicking the can down the road, and pushing it and kicking it down the road, and you're never going to do well on the test, because you're never going to you're never going to take it. That's what ends up happening. So if you don't have to reschedule it, don't reschedule it. Put that as like your stake in the ground that says, I'm not going to go past this. We do know, however, COVID has caused lots of problems. There was in January some testing centers that canceled the MCAT, and so people were forced into reschedules. This is just the way of the world for right now. We have to be prepared for that. GRE is the only one that is currently offered as a take-it-home online test. However, I will say this: it has caused problems. People get disqualified for really weird things, but if your webcam isn't just right, you can't take it. If your room doesn't look just right, you can't take it. They do interrupt you from time to time and say, please show us both your hands. So you have to hold your hands up in front of the camera. And so there's a lot of weird stuff about it. If there's no other way you can take the test, take it online at home, but I would still suggest taking the testing center, because it's less headaches and it'll just go better for you overall. Okay, so first off, or not first off, I've had a lot of first offs. So next thing I want to talk about is taking a practice test. Before you even start studying, take a practice test. You got to know what you're studying for. I liken this to when you're in a lecture class and the teacher doesn't give you a practice test, and you get to that first test and you're thrown. You're just like, whoa, I was not expecting this. You do not want that to happen on the MCAT. You want to study for the test because you know what it is. Get that first starting point done. Take a practice test. If you haven't taken a practice GRE, DAT, or MCAT at this point, do it if you're preparing for your test soon. Even if you're not preparing for it soon, just do it. One of the reasons why I suggest doing that is because it's going to be a terrible score. It's going to be awful the first time you do it. And it's okay. If you do it this way, you now have a reason for it being such an awful score. You didn't prepare. So if you take this cold test without preparing, you get that low score out of the way, and it doesn't hurt as bad. It doesn't make you feel as terrible. And the real reason to do it is just so you know what it is that you're doing. It's hard to study for the MCAT without knowing what is on the MCAT or how the questions work. Same with the DAT, especially for, honestly, the GRE, because you have special types of questions on the GRE, which are very difficult. And then it's taken to a whole new level with the DAT. Like the math has these types of questions called quantitative comparisons and data sufficiency questions. If you don't know how they work, then you're not going to do well. And reading the instructions right there in the moment doesn't make any sense. It just is confusing. So get to know your test. Get to understand what it is that you're studying for, and it will go better. You can target things a whole lot better. So there are free full-length practice tests available from many, many, many different companies. You don't have to buy a test to take a practice test. There's lots of companies: Altius, Blueprint, Kaplan, Princeton Review, Berkeley Review. If you're doing the MCAT, the AMC has a sample test. I'll warn you guys about that one. It doesn't have an estimated score. The official tests pretty much stink. For the MCAT, the DAT, the GRE official practice tests are pretty good, that are free. The AMC practice test, not great. The DAT, don't buy their official DAT. I'm just going to say this straight up for whoever was taking the DAT. It costs $120 to get a practice test. It's not free. You have to pay, and it is not a complete practice test, and you also can't review it when you're done. Like, it's one of the worst practice tests out there. So stick with one of the other companies that has these free practice tests available for this at this point in time. Some of the tests were changed specifically for COVID. So make sure that when you sign up for a practice test that you're going to take, don't take the COVID version. Make sure it's just a full length, because none of those COVID versions matter anymore. I do recommend the AMC MCAT practice test. What I'm talking about here specifically, Gustavo, is the AMC sample test, the one that's available for free. The free one is not very good, well constructed. It's made up of MCAT questions from before the switch in 2015, and it doesn't give you an estimated score. It just gives you % correct. So it doesn't really tell you anything about where you're at. Because that's the last thing we also want from this test, is we want to know what our starting point is, what our starting score is, because you got to know where you start to know how far you can get, kind of thing. So the AMC practice test, the ones you pay for, those I think are good and valuable, but the sample test is the one I don't believe is a good choice to do as practice, or at least at that stage, because it'll allow us to figure out what our target score is. And it'll also help us figure out what it is that we're going to prep, or how we're going to prep. So if your original score is very, very low, like it is very far from the target score that you come up with, you might consider doing something like a prep course. If it's okay, but like you're struggling in one or two areas, then you might use a tutor. If you're close, reasonably close to your target score, then you might consider self-prepping. So it can tell you a lot about where you're at, about like in your studying, and what you might have to actually do to study. So how do we figure out our target score? Find out what your schools are expecting from you, first off. Go to their websites, talk to an admissions counselor at the school. Like, talk to somebody that knows the details about it, and figure out what they're expecting you to have. There's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet. Reddit is particularly nasty. There's a DAT, there's an MCAT, and there's a GRE Reddit, all of which give you very weird, wild expectations of what you need to have on your respective tests. Like, there's things out there that say, you're like, yeah, you should get a 515 on the MCAT. You don't need a 515 on your MCAT, guys. GRE is particularly notable. Our GRE people here, I'm not sure if you're in a science field. I think you guys are probably mostly health fields here. If you are, they don't care about the verbal score. It's like almost non-essential. As long as you're 50th percentile or above on the verbal score, you're good enough. It's the math they're going to look at. That's the math score that you need to maximize. So who cares what your cumulative is? All they care about is what your quantitative score is. So find out from the horse's mouth. Do not believe what somebody on Reddit or Student Doctor Network tells you about the schools and what their expectations are. Talk to them, ask them, find out what their averages are. So if a school's average MCAT is, say, 512, you don't have to have a 512 to go to that school, guys. You don't have to. It's an average. That means people above 512 went and people below 512 went. So there's a window. You don't have to have 512. 508, perfectly fine score. 507, perfectly fine score. Same with GRE. If you don't get that 170, you know, if you're getting a 165, that's a perfectly fine score. So you do not have to be perfect. And I also suggest you set 2 goals. Or more, honestly, to be fully truthful. Goal setting is an important part of studying for any standardized test, because you can track your progress if you have goals, because we know where we started. That's our original practice test. And then we know where we're going, and we can do stair stepping every practice test and get a little bit closer, a little bit closer. It builds momentum. It builds confidence when you can start seeing that progress. And I always suggest you have 2 goals, the must-have goal, like the thing I have to have. So for example, on a GRE, my must-have goal on the quant section is, I'm going to say 155. You want to be 155 or higher to be a competitive applicant. My must-have score on an MCAT, if I'm going to an MD school, is going to be a 508. I want to have that 508 to be competitive. If I am looking at my DAT, a must-have score is like a 20 to 21 to be nice and competitive. And then you can always have your I would like to have score. Now, I have to have a 508. I would like to have a 512. I have to have a 155. I would like to have a 165, that kind of thing. And that way once you hit that first goal, that must-have goal, you're good, you're golden. Because now all it is every other point past that just gets you closer to that score you would like to have. And it feels good. And you feel, again, empowered, because you're done with the hard work. Now you're just going that next few steps. The thing I want to advise most of you against, like all of you, to be honest, the pie in the sky score. Like I want to do as good as I can, as the best score possible. Why is that not a great choice? Why is that a horrible way to set yourself up for success? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Number one, you don't know what that is. Exactly. If you don't know what it is, then you don't know if you're making progress towards it. You don't know if you're past it or not. Any other thoughts on that? The super high scores, it's really difficult to get them. And the disappointment, I think that's a huge part of it, is if you're always far away from that goal, like here's your goal. It's like way up here of I want the highest score possible, and I'm only here. You're always looking up at that thing going like, oh my God, that's still so far away. And you're just going to be demoralized and feel bad. And that's not going to be good for your prep, because half of the battle, more than half the battle here, is confidence. If you're frustrated and angry all the time because you're never getting closer to your score, you're not going to feel good about it, and you're not going to want to study. Your studying is going to suffer, and you're going to start to resent the test, and that's terrible. So I really strongly suggest you guys set these goals, because like if you've heard of SMART goal setting, this is the part of the idea of SMART goal setting. You want to have something that is trackable and you can make progress on, because then all of a sudden, when you're starting to check those boxes off, I hit this target, it feels good, and you feel that momentum going. That really takes a lot of the pressure off of your studying. So how do I know how to prep? So there's 3 things, or I mean, really there's more than this, but there's 3 things that you can do as far as prepping is concerned. The first of those is self-prepping. And self-prepping is for you guys that really self-motivate well. You have the ability to set a schedule. You have the ability to stick to that schedule and not push things off. And also for those of you who have it, like your first score was okay. It's not going to be great, but it was okay. And so you're like, a little bit away from your target score, but you can probably motivate yourself to get there. Self-prepping is a good option for that. If you need to improve less than 10 points across the sections, that's for MCAT and for GRE. For DAT, that would be more like if you need to improve like 5 points across the sections, because the DAT is a lot smaller scale for the scores. So 10 points for MCAT GRE, 5 points for DAT. Basically meaning you're close. You don't have to go that far to improve. When would I think a tutor is good? If you need a little bit of external motivation. Some of you guys might need that kick in the pants once in a while from a tutor to like, come on, are you doing the studying? Are you doing it? So the tutor can help with that motivation. And it's still, though, you can use a tutor for if you're needing to improve a little bit, or even maybe more in 1 or 2 of the sections of your test. In the case of the GRE, 1 of the sections, because there's only 2 sections. There's math and there's English. So if you've got, basically the idea is if it's something targeted, if there's something that is a target that you can focus on. When do you need a prep course? If you need a lot of external motivation, the prep course like forces you to do it because you have homework. They give you the schedule. You got to go to class. If you don't have your homework done, class is going to stink. And, you know, it's sort of that somebody's always pushing you from behind kind of thing. Or if you've got some deficiencies across the test, if you're weak in all the sections of your test, a tutor is usually not the good way to go there. A prep course can get you brought up to speed on the whole test better than a tutor. And a tutor would probably be more expensive than a route to do that same job. So honestly, also, it's what you want. If you want to do a prep course, do a prep course. If you want to self-prep, self-prep. If you want to get a tutor, get a tutor. If you want to do more than one of these, do that too. Because if you're happy, if you think this is the way you want to do this and you're happy, it's actually going to work the best for you if you're happy about it. Now, where do you get this stuff? Classes, some of the companies that do classes are going to be Berkeley Review, Princeton Review, Kaplan, Blueprint, Exam Crackers. There's some smaller names out there that do prepping. TPR, Princeton Review, Kaplan, Med School Coach is where you can get tutors. If you want some like hybrid thing, Altius is a good way to go. They're only MCAT. They're MCAT only. Same with Med School Coach. They're MCAT only. Although I think Med School Coach has done some DAT tutoring before. Hybrid Altius is kind of weird for you MCAT folks in that it's more of a coach. They don't have a class. It's not a tutor per se. It's like somebody cheering you on and helping you develop your schedule and things like that. So it's kind of a hybrid in the middle. And self-prepping is, you just got to get your materials, which can be harder to find for you DAT folks. DAT's materials are a little bit tricky. So ask questions, get discounts, never pay full price. This is my rule. Never pay full price. The only company I know that will not do any discounts is the Berkeley Review. They refuse to do discounts completely. And it's just the way they are. Every other company that you're going to run into that's a test prep will probably give you a 10% discount if you ask, or a 5% discount or something. So do ask those questions. Other things to ask. What are the perks I get with the course? How are your teachers trained? If you're working with a private tutor, have you taken the test? Like something about tutors. I know people tend to shy away from tutors for stuff like this because they can be expensive. But honestly, you want an expensive tutor because they will tutor you more effectively and you will do less hours. I've seen this happen a million times. Somebody goes with a $50 an hour tutor and they end up spending like 30, 40, 50 hours with that tutor. They buy a $300 an hour tutor and they spend 5 hours with that tutor. Which one's more expensive? 5 hours at $300 an hour or 30 hours at or 40 hours at $50 an hour? The 40 hours at 50 is more expensive than the 5 at 300. The tutors that cost that much usually know their stuff better and they target things and they're not going to charge you for things that you don't need. So don't shy away from a tutor just because they're expensive. Ask them the questions of like, what's your experience teaching? And Like, when did you take the test? A person that is in med school isn't necessarily a good tutor for MCAT. A person who is in vet school is not necessarily a good tutor for GRE. Just because they did well on their test does not make them a good teacher. So ask those questions. Find out if they're good at their job, basically. Don't hire somebody that's just terrible at their job. Materials, you're going to need materials to study for these things. There's all kinds of content all over the place. This is MCAT specific. I'll toss in some of the DAT and GRE companies on top of that. So for content, your big ones are Kaplan, Print and Review, and Exam Crackers. They have all the tests covered, basically. They have DAT covered as well, although be wary of the Princeton Review on the DAT book. I think it's still not updated to represent the current test because it did change. For GRE, another company I'm going to toss in here for content is Manhattan Prep. Manhattan Prep is an excellent company for content for the GRE. They have developed a really solid product over the years, and I find that their materials are primo. For DAT, content review, probably the best one around for DAT is going to be DAT Destroyer. DAT Destroyer is it's a dude. I think he calls himself Ochem Matt or something like that. He prepared these books a while ago, and they're actually still some of the best for the DAT. So DAT Destroyer works really well there for content. Other places you can attain content if finances become an issue is a Khan Academy. They have, even if it's not specific for a particular test, they have lots of videos on the biology, chemistry, physics, for the math topics that you need to study. You just got to be a little more careful with it. A special note for the MCAT and Khan Academy, the MCAT materials have been discontinued on Khan Academy. They are still there. You have to search for them, but they will not exist after September 30th. They're being dropped off the website. There are rumors that AMC is picking it up. We don't know yet what is going on with that stuff. So right now, Khan Academy still has MCAT material that's specific for the MCAT, but it could be changed. Well, it definitely will change on September 30th. We don't know if it will be available anymore. YouTube has some great stuff. There's a guy, I can't remember, Ted's videos. What's his name? For DAT. Chad's videos. Thank you, Maria. Chad's videos. I knew it was like a short name like that. Chad's videos are pretty good on YouTube as free options for DAT materials. So you've got either video content or book content. You want to have the content covered. When it comes to practice problems, you want to get some kind of source of practice problems. So again, this is MCAT specific on the screen: Blueprint, Exam Crackers, Kaplan, UWorld. These are all places where they have question banks. Also for DAT, you've got Crack DAT and you've got DAT Bootcamp. That's a good place to get your content practice problems. And for GRE, you go to Print and Review, Kaplan, or again, Manhattan Prep for practice problems. Honestly, my favorite book of content practice problems is Manhattan Prep's 5-pound GRE book. It's the 5-pound book of GRE problems. It's really excellent. It's like kind of my Bible for practicing with the GRE. So, and then of course, Khan Academy has some free options again for practice because all their videos have associated practice. And we'll talk about why you want both of those in just a second. And then you want full-length practice tests. Altius, Blueprint, Berkeley Review, Exam Crackers, Kaplan, TPR all have MCATs. Funny enough, for the GRE, the official GRE materials actually have 2 free practice tests and 3 you pay for. Those are the best. Just use those 5 because you can retake those and actually get a different experience because it's an adaptive test. For full-length practice test for the DAT, again, Crack DAT and DAT Bootcamp is probably your best source. Although Kaplan has some practice tests for the DAT. There's also the AMC that has practice tests, Altius Blueprint, Kaplan. The Army, weirdly enough, has free MCATs available for the MCAT. I was always wondered why they have 3 of their own. The problem I have with them is they're actually formatted funky. They're not MCAT formatting. They're a different style. So that is an issue. Always, when you're trying to get these materials, apply for fee assistance, especially like AMC has a fee assistance program that will actually give you their materials for free, their bundle for free. Kaplan does fee assistance for any of their products. You can get up to 60% off if you qualify for their fee assistance. And really, it's just a matter of like entering a couple numbers off your FAFSA into their application. And I've known almost everybody that applies gets something. If it's only 10%, it's only 10%, but 10% is more than nothing. And like I said, look around for those discounts. Never pay full price, except for with Berkeley Review. Never pay full price, because they will almost always have some kind of ad running, some kind of campaign where they're going to give you X% off or this % off, etc. So these are the materials you need: content books, or your content source, your practice problems, and your full-length practice tests. Here's why. Split your time when you're figuring out your schedule into 2/3 and 1/3. This works for most people. 2/3 of it should be content review and practice. Notice I said and practice. 2/3 should be content and practice at the same time. Just because you know stuff does not mean you can answer questions. Sheldon Cooper would do terrible on a standardized test because he knows everything, but he doesn't know how it's asked. He has a hard time interpreting the questions. And the same is true for everybody. Just because you know things doesn't mean you recognize what the question's asking you for. You don't understand the task. This is particularly notable on those weird question types that the GRE produces. Like, the math on the GRE is so basic. It's arithmetic. Like, there's questions which are simply just raising a number to a power. That's it. That's all you're expected to do mathematically. But they format the question so weird that you don't know how to do that. That's what you need to do. It seems like the question is very tough. So just because you know the science and the math and the vocabulary and whatever it is you need for your test does not mean you actually know how to answer those questions. So I very much want to encourage everybody to do content and practice at the same time. Never just do all your content review. A lot of the plans that are floating around out there on the internet, that's what they suggest you do. Review all of the content, then do practice. And invariably, I find that the first thing that happens when you do all your content review and take that first practice test, the score is still terrible, maybe worse than your taking it cold test. And all right then and there, you feel like, what did I just spend 2 months doing? And you're depressed. And that is not a good way to study. So always do content and practice at the same time. It's a smart way to do things. Then reserve about 1/3 of your time there at the end. Just work on your stamina. These tests are not short. The GRE is the shortest at 4 hours. The DAT is 5 hours. The MCAT is 8 hours. You need to work on practicing many questions at a time. Like, eventually, you need to be prepared to work for 90 minutes at once. All 3 tests have sections that will be 90 minutes, at least one section that's 90 minutes long. So you want to be able to work solidly for 90 minutes without fatigue, without losing your mojo. Because just because you can do really well on one passage or 10 questions or something like that, you're not thinking about things like pacing. So if you get tired or fatigued, the pacing changes by the end of that, and you need to learn how that works. So you want to develop that stamina right there at the end. So like I say down here in the corner, accuracy plus timing plus stamina. That's a good solid prep. You need to get your accuracy up, You got to make sure the timing is good, and you got to make sure the stamina is good, because all three of those things will build up to make a good test prep. And then during this whole thing, you should be doing practice tests periodically. Don't save all your practice tests to the end, because not only does practice tests develop stamina, they're progress reports. They tell you how you're improving over time, if you're improving over time. If you're not showing improvement, then you got to retool the way you're studying. You will figure out that I'm not doing it right. I have to change my schedule or whatever I'm going to do. Build in extra days into your study plan. I see this happen all the time, where people are just like studying and they don't have days off for overflow or just for having a day off. The reason I say overflow is maybe Monday goes terrible. I wasn't able to do my studying. I still got Sunday. I can do that. I can catch up. But if you never have time to catch up built into your schedule, you're going to get behind. So build in those buffers. Plus, some days you just need to like veg and watch and binge something on TV. It's okay to binge. You can still do that while you're taking or studying for a test like the MCAT. For your content review, schedule your times like classes. Don't sit down for 4 hours and think, I'm going to study all this in 4 hours. Do like an hour and a half in the morning, and then an hour in the afternoon, and an hour and a half in the evening, or something like that. Put it on your calendar like that. And then mix up the subjects, 1 or 2 subjects a day. Passage every or 2 every day. Like all your tests have passages on them. And then CARS or reading comprehension. Do a little bit of reading comprehension every single day, so that you're working on that reading comp, because all 3 tests have reading comp. I would encourage you all to do a little bit of reading comp every single day, with the exception of your day off. But that's because you're going to get better at that over time. When it comes to the stamina development, what I mean there is, like, I literally want you to, by the time you're just before the test, you should be doing full sections of your test every single day. So like doing a full CARS section, or a full PAT section like on the DAT, a full verbal section every day on your GRE or something like that. Put all this together and you got the 3 pieces. You get your accuracy up, you get your timing going, and you got your stamina. So those are those 3 pillars that will hold up your test prep. The 4th pillar of test prep, though, is confidence. And all this is built around building your confidence, because if you don't have confidence, it's difficult to do well. So that's what I got to say about doing standardized test prep, and like how you should be getting ready for your test. Here's my info. You feel free to email me or call if you have questions. I'm going to open the floor up for questions right now. I do want to let everybody know that I do test prep specific drop-ins on Wednesdays from 3 to 5. I'm happy to answer your questions there as well. If you want to start setting a schedule, take a practice test, set up an appointment, or drop in with me, and we can start putting together a prep calendar for you guys. I don't give you prep calendars, but I will help you build one. I think it's important that you build your own calendars. So what kind of questions do you guys have for me? And feel free to use your microphones too if you want to ask a question. Are you all overwhelmed, or no questions? There's a question. There we go. On the GRE, if the school only takes quant, should you only focus on that? No, I don't think you should only focus on that, because you never know what you might use your GRE for in the future. I would make sure you don't need to max out your vocab score or your verbal score, but you should at least get it to a reasonable place. You don't want to have like a 140 verbal and then like a 165 math. That would be bad. But like at least get the verbal up to a reasonable score. Because say you want to apply, say you change your mind later on and you want to end up applying to business school. Maybe you want to get a business degree after you get your vet degree or something like that. Then you're going to need a GRE for that too. So, and they might look at the GRE a little bit differently than say a vet school will. How do you determine what you're doing wrong if your studies or score plateaus for the MCAT? And this is the same for all of them, the ever-present plateau. People get to like a max and they just sit there, or God forbid it starts going down a little bit. What that probably means is you're focusing too much on content. And I can't say this is true for everybody. This is something like, again, you can bring those questions into a session with me and we can talk about it. But it probably means you focused only on the content. And once you know all the content, that's as high as you're going to get. What you want to do is to start looking at the questions, like why are you getting the question wrong? So there's 3 questions I suggest everybody ask when they're reviewing a test. The first one is not, did I know the content? That's the last one. The first question is, did I understand what I was supposed to do on the question? That's the first question you got to ask. Do I understand the question? The second thing is, did I use the information on the test to answer that question? The third thing is, okay, if I did all that, did I actually know the content I was supposed to know for it? So what normally people do is they start with the content question. That's the only one they ask. And that's where I see the plateau is I just need to know more. I need to know more. I need to know more. And just because you know it doesn't mean you can recognize it. So that's that idea behind understanding what the question's asking you to do, what it's asking you to accomplish. So you need to switch up a little bit of what you're focusing on with reviewing your questions. Most likely. Again, I say most likely because there could be other things at play, but that's the most common thing I see. Good question. Any other questions? All righty. Well, it looks like we are at the end of our time, and it looks like the questions have died down. So I want to thank you guys for coming today. I appreciate y'all hanging out, learn a little bit about what you can do to prepare for a test. Hopefully this helps you out in getting your plan together. And like I said, if you have any questions, schedule an appointment or drop in on Wednesday afternoons or email or call or whatever it is. And I'm happy to help you guys. Oh, and for those of you on the AMSA site, I'm also on the AMSA Discord. I can answer questions there too.